My daughter and her husband were emptying my garage while I was supposed to be fishing 2 states away. But when my buddy's boat engine blew a gasket on the highway, I turned around and came home 12 hours early. What I found in my own driveway made me pick up the phone and dial a number that would change all of our lives forever. Before I get into what happened next, drop a comment and tell me where you're watching this story from. I want to know how far this tale of family betrayal has traveled. The fishing trip had been Ray's idea. He'd been trying to get me out of the house ever since Eleanor passed 2 years ago, and honestly, I'd been looking forward to it. 4 days on Lake Hartwell, just 2 old electricians drinking coffee at sunrise and lying about the fish we almost caught. But we barely made it 40 miles outside of Knoxville before Ray's trailer hitch cracked and the boat nearly jackknifed into oncoming traffic. We spent 3 hours on the shoulder of I-40 waiting for a tow truck, and by the time the mechanic gave us the verdict, neither of us had the heart to rent another boat. "Trip's dead," Ray said, shaking his head. "I'll make it up to you next month." I told him not to worry about it. Truth is, part of me was relieved to be heading home. I'd been sleeping poorly ever since Eleanor died, and our bed in that old farmhouse was the only place I could still smell her lavender lotion on the pillows. I pulled onto our gravel road around 4 in the afternoon, windows down, listening to the cicadas. Our property sits on 3 acres outside Maryville, Tennessee. Eleanor and I bought it in 1987 when I was still pulling wire for the local utility company. We raised 2 kids there, buried a dog under the oak tree, and spent 38 years turning a run-down farmhouse into a home. That's when I saw the U-Haul, a 14-foot box truck, bright orange, sitting right there in my driveway with the rear door rolled up. I slowed my pickup to a crawl, my chest tightening. I hadn't ordered anything. I wasn't expecting any deliveries, and I sure as hell wasn't moving anywhere. I parked on the road instead of pulling in, something telling me to approach quietly. 40 years of working around live wires teaches you to respect that little voice in your gut that says something's wrong. I walked up the driveway, staying close to the tree line. The truck was half full. I could see furniture, blankets, cardboard boxes, the corner of something wooden poking out from under a tarp. Then I heard voices coming from inside my detached garage, the one I'd converted into a workshop after I retired. I pressed myself against the side wall and listened. "We need to get the table saw out before he gets back Monday," a man's voice said. "That's a Marcus, my son-in-law, Jessica's husband of 11 years. Then my daughter's voice, strained and impatient. "Forget the table saw. Did you get the boxes from the bedroom closet? The ones with Mom's jewelry?" My hands started shaking, not from fear, from something deeper, something that rises up from the bottom of your stomach when the people you love confirm the worst thing you've ever suspected about them. I stepped around the corner and into the open garage door. They were both there. Jessica had her back to me, wrapping something in newspaper. Marcus was dragging my grandfather's steamer trunk across the concrete floor, leaving white scratches on the surface I'd sealed myself. "What in God's name are you doing?" The sound that came out of my daughter's mouth wasn't a scream. It was more like a gasp that got stuck halfway. She spun around, and the look on her face told me everything I needed to know. This wasn't a surprise visit. This wasn't helping Dad organize the garage. This was a robbery. Marcus froze with his hands still on the trunk, hunched over like a man caught reaching into someone else's wallet. Which, in a way, he was. "Dad," Jessica's voice cracked. "You're not supposed to be back until Monday." That sentence hit me harder than anything she could have said. "Not Dad. I can explain. Not Dad. This isn't what it looks like. Just, you're not supposed to be back until Monday." Like I was the one who'd done something wrong by showing up at my own house. I walked past them both without a word and went straight to the U-Haul. I grabbed the metal rail and pulled myself up into the cargo bed. What I found in there nearly put me on my knees. Eleanor's china cabinet. The one her grandmother had shipped over from Ireland in 1952. Eleanor had polished that cabinet every Sunday morning for as long as I'd known her. After she died, I kept polishing it myself because stopping felt like admitting she was really gone. Behind the cabinet, stacked in boxes, I found Eleanor's quilts. She'd been a quilter for 30 years, and each one told the story of some chapter in our family's life. The blue and yellow one she'd made when Jessica was born, the red one she'd stitched during my recovery from back surgery, the green and white one she'd been working on during her final months, her fingers still nimble even as the rest of her faded. I pulled back a moving blanket and found my tools. Not the everyday stuff. The good ones. My father's hand planes that he'd used building houses in the Smoky Mountains. A set of brass calipers from 1928 that my grandfather carried in his apron pocket every day of his working life. The rosewood mallet I'd made as my journeyman project when I was 19 years old. Then I saw it, and I had to sit down right there on the truck bed. Eleanor's cedar memory box. I'd built it for our 25th anniversary from a tree that had fallen on our property during a storm. Inside were every letter I'd ever written her, our children's first drawings, a lock of hair from each baby's first haircut, our wedding rings from before we upgraded on our 30th, and the hospital bracelet from the day she was diagnosed. She'd wanted to keep it as a reminder, she said, that every day after was borrowed time and should be treated like a gift. I sat in that truck holding my wife's memory box and felt something break inside me that I didn't know could still break. When I climbed down, Jessica was crying. Marcus stood behind her with his arms crossed, his jaw set in that stubborn way that I'd never liked, but Eleanor had told me to ignore. I need to see inside the house, I said. Dad, please let us explain. Jessica started. Inside. Now, what I found made the truck look like a minor offense. The living room was stripped. The bookshelves Eleanor had filled with first editions, empty. The antique clock that had hung above our fireplace since 1991, gone. The framed photographs along the hallway, the ones documenting 40 years of family milestones, had been taken down and replaced with cheaper prints so I wouldn't notice the gaps. I walked into our bedroom. Eleanor's vanity, the one with the cracked mirror she'd refused to replace because it had been her mother's, was still there. But the drawers were cleaned out. Every piece of jewelry, her pearl earrings from our honeymoon in Savannah, the garnet brooch her father had given her on her 16th birthday, the simple gold locket that held tiny photos of Jessica and our son David. How long? I asked, turning to face them in the hallway. My voice was quiet, the kind of quiet that comes before a storm. Marcus looked at the floor. Jessica wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. How long have you been stealing from me? 3 months, Jessica whispered. Maybe 4. 4 months. 16 weeks of coming into my home while I was at doctor's appointments or poker night or visiting Ray. 16 weeks of picking through my life like vultures over a carcass. I thought about all those times Jessica had called to ask how I was doing, what my plans were for the weekend, whether I'd been sleeping better. I'd thought she was being a caring daughter. She was casing her own father's house. I walked to my study. The filing cabinet in the corner had been Eleanor's system. She'd organized everything with colored tabs, insurance policies in blue, property documents in green, financial records in red. I pulled open the top drawer. Half the green tabs were missing. Where are my property documents? I said. Marcus stepped forward. Robert, listen. We were going to put everything back. My house deed, my insurance declarations, my bank statements. Where are they? The silence that followed was the loudest thing I'd ever heard. That's when Frank DeLuca knocked on my screen door. Frank lived on the next property over. A retired fire captain who'd spent 30 years running into burning buildings while everyone else ran out. He and Eleanor had been close. After she passed, Frank made a habit of checking on me, bringing over casseroles his wife Angela made, sitting on the porch with me on the hard nights. Everything okay over here, Bob? Frank asked through the screen. Saw the U-Haul and your truck's parked funny on the road. Come on in, Frank. I need a witness. Frank took one look at the scene. The empty shelves, the stripped walls, Marcus and Jessica standing there like defendants waiting for a verdict, and his expression changed from concern to something cold and focused. Tell me, he said, closing the screen door behind him. I laid it out. The U-Haul, Eleanor's belongings, the emptied closets, the missing documents. Frank listened without interrupting, his arms folded, his eyes moving between Jessica and Marcus the way a man evaluates a structure for hidden fire damage. Have you checked your financial accounts? Frank asked. I hadn't. With shaking hands, I pulled out my phone and opened my banking app. The checking account looked normal, but when I switched to the savings account, the one Eleanor and I had built over 4 decades, I felt the floor tilt under my feet. 3 withdrawals, $4,000 each, spread over the past 3 months, transferred to an account I didn't recognize. $12,000, I said, holding up the phone so Frank could see. They've taken $12,000 from my savings. Jessica's face went white. Marcus's jaw unclenched for the first time since I'd caught them. That wasn't supposed to happen yet, Marcus muttered, then caught himself. Yet? I stepped toward him. What do you mean yet? Frank put a hand on my shoulder. Bob, we should check more than just the bank. Over the next hour, Frank helped me go through everything. We found that someone had contacted my insurance company, pretending to be me, requesting a change of beneficiary on my life insurance policy. The new beneficiary was listed as a trust I'd never heard of. We found that Marcus had used my social security number, which he'd gotten from the tax documents in my filing cabinet, to apply for a home equity line of credit. The application was pending. If it had gone through, they could have borrowed up to $180,000 against my property. We found a folder hidden in Marcus's briefcase that he'd left in the garage. Inside were photocopies of my driver's license, my social security card, Eleanor's death certificate, and a draft of a power of attorney document with a forged version of my signature. Frank held up the power of attorney and looked at Marcus. You know what this is, right? This isn't just theft. This is fraud. Identity theft. Attempted elder abuse under Tennessee law. We're talking felony charges. Marcus's composure finally cracked. It was Jessica's idea, he blurted out, pointing at my daughter. Jessica spun on him. Don't you dare. You're the one who said we could flip the antiques for cash. You're the one who found the buyer for Mom's furniture. Buyer? I said. You already sold some of Eleanor's things? The silence came back, thick and suffocating. Jessica nodded slowly. The bookshelf contents, Mom's first editions. A dealer in Chattanooga gave us $6,200, and some of the smaller antiques. Another $3,800 through an online auction site. $10,000. On top of the $12,000 from my savings. On top of the $15,000 worth of items currently sitting in that U-Haul. On top of the attempted mortgage fraud that could have cost me my home. I sat down in Eleanor's chair. The cushion still held the shape of her. I put my hands over my face and breathed. Everyone get out of my house. Dad, Jessica said. Out. All of you. I need to think. Frank ushered them outside and came back a few minutes later with 2 cups of coffee from my kitchen. He sat across from me and didn't say anything for a long time. That's one of the things I appreciated most about Frank. He knew when silence was more useful than words. What would Eleanor do? I finally asked. Frank thought about it. She'd want justice and mercy in equal measure. She always said people should face consequences for their actions, but she also believed anyone could change if they wanted it badly enough. He was right. Eleanor had been the one who insisted we give Jessica a second chance when she dropped out of nursing school. She'd been the one who welcomed Marcus into the family despite my reservations about a man who always seemed to be calculating the value of everything he looked at. But Eleanor also kept a baseball bat by the front door and wasn't afraid to use it. Mercy without accountability was just weakness wearing a kind face. I made 3 phone calls that night. The first was to my lawyer, Howard Chen, who'd handled Eleanor's estate. I told him everything. He was quiet for a long time, then said he'd start preparing documents in the morning. The second call was to the Blount County Sheriff's Department. I filed a report, not to have anyone arrested that night, but to create a paper trail. The third call was to my son David in Portland. He deserved to know what his sister had done. David was furious. He wanted to fly home immediately, confront Jessica, handle things himself. I told him to stay put. This was between me and his sister, and I needed to handle it my way. The next morning at 7 sharp, I called Jessica and Marcus. I told them to be at my house by noon, and to bring every receipt, every record of every item they'd sold, and every penny they still had from what they'd stolen. They showed up at 11:45. Jessica looked like she hadn't slept. Marcus had the expression of a man doing mental math on his chances. Frank was already there, sitting on my porch with his coffee, steady as a stone wall. I spread Eleanor's quilts on the kitchen table, the ones I'd retrieved from the U-Haul. I wanted them to see what they'd been willing to throw away. Then I laid out the numbers. Cash stolen from savings, $12,000. Items sold to dealers, $10,000. Items in the U-Haul valued at approximately $15,000. Legal costs for unwinding the insurance fraud and stopping the mortgage application, estimated $5,000. Total, $42,000. Marcus went pale. Jessica started crying again. Here's what's going to happen, I said. You have 60 days to pay back every cent, all $42,000. I don't care how you get it. Sell your cars, cash out your retirement accounts, get second jobs, third jobs. I don't care. 60 days. That's impossible, Marcus said. Then I turned this file over to the sheriff and let the prosecutor decide what's possible. Identity theft, elder financial abuse, burglary. Your insurance license will be revoked before the trial date is set. Jessica, you'll lose your nursing certification with a felony on your record. You'll both be looking at prison time. The kitchen was silent except for the ticking of the mantel clock in the next room, the one they hadn't gotten around to stealing yet. And one more thing, I said, looking directly at Marcus. I want to know who the antique dealer in Chattanooga is. I want Eleanor's books back. Every single one. If even one is missing, the deal is off. Jessica whispered. We'll do it, Dad. Whatever it takes. Marcus said nothing. He just stared at the quilts on the table with an expression I couldn't read. I hoped it was shame, but I suspected it was calculation. The next 60 days were the hardest of my life, and I've buried a wife and survived 2 heart scares. Marcus cracked first, but not the way I'd hoped. Within 2 weeks, he moved out of the house he shared with Jessica and filed for divorce. Claimed the whole scheme was Jessica's idea, that he'd been pressured into participating, that he was the real victim. He hired a lawyer and started positioning himself to walk away clean. But Frank had been keeping records, photographs, timestamps, the forged power of attorney in Marcus's handwriting. And Howard, my lawyer, had subpoenaed the bank records showing that the stolen $12,000 had been deposited into an account Marcus controlled, one that Jessica didn't even have access to. Marcus wasn't a victim. He was the architect. Jessica had been desperate and foolish, but Marcus had provided the blueprint. When Marcus realized the evidence wasn't going his way, he tried to run, packed a bag, and booked a one-way flight to Phoenix. Frank spotted the taxi at 6 a.m. and called me. I called Howard. Howard called the sheriff. They picked Marcus up at McGee-Tyson Airport 20 minutes before his flight boarded. He was arrested that afternoon. The charges were extensive: identity theft, financial exploitation of an elderly person, forgery, attempted mortgage fraud, and theft over $10,000. His insurance license was suspended by the state within the week. His own lawyer dropped him a month later when Marcus couldn't pay the retainer. Jessica watched all of this happen, and something in her changed. She didn't run. She didn't make excuses. She didn't blame anyone else. She came to my house the morning after Marcus was arrested, sat at my kitchen table, and said 5 words that broke through 40 years of walls between us. I became just like him. She meant Marcus, I think. But I also think she meant something bigger. She meant the version of herself that had looked at her dead mother's belongings and seen dollar signs instead of memories. Jessica sold her car. She sold her jewelry, even her wedding ring, which I thought was fitting given the circumstances. She took a second shift at the hospital where she worked and picked up weekend hours at a home health agency. She contacted the antique dealer in Chattanooga herself and bought back every single one of Eleanor's first editions. The dealer charged her double what he'd paid, and she didn't argue. She just paid it. Every Friday evening, she'd come to my house with an envelope. Some weeks it was $500. Some weeks it was $200. Once it was $1,100, and her hands were shaking when she handed it over. I don't know where you got this much in 1 week, I said. I sold Mom's engagement ring, she said quietly. The one Marcus pawned 2 months ago. I tracked it down at a shop in Sevierville and bought it back with my overtime pay. Then I sold it to a jeweler who promised to take care of it. I stared at her. You bought it back just to sell it again? I couldn't keep it, Dad. I don't deserve to keep anything of Mom's. Not yet. But I wanted to make sure it went to someone who'd value it. That was the first moment I thought maybe my daughter could find her way back. Frank checked in on her progress without telling me, because that's the kind of man Frank is. He told me weeks later that he'd driven past the hospital parking lot at midnight and seen her car there, that he'd watched her mowing a neighbor's lawn on her only day off, that she'd started attending financial counseling sessions at the community center every Wednesday night, the same sessions I'd made a condition of our agreement. By day 55, Jessica had paid back $31,000. She was gaunt, exhausted, running on coffee and guilt, but her eyes were clearer than they'd been in years. I can get the rest, she said. I just need a few more weeks. I looked at my daughter, really looked at her for the first time since that afternoon in the garage. She was wearing scrubs that were too big for her now, her hair pulled back in a messy knot. No makeup, no pretense. She looked more like the girl who used to help Eleanor in the garden than the woman who'd tried to rob me blind. "Sit down," I said. She sat. "Your mother kept a letter in her memory box," I told her. "She wrote it during her last week. It was addressed to both you and David, but she asked me to give it to you when you needed it most." Jessica's face crumpled. I went to the cedar box, which I'd moved back to its place by the window, and pulled out a lavender envelope with Eleanor's careful handwriting on the front. Jessica read it silently, tears running down her face and landing on the kitchen table. I didn't know what the letter said. Eleanor had sealed it and asked me not to read it, and in 2 years I'd kept that promise. When Jessica finished, she folded the letter carefully and pressed it against her chest. "She said she forgives me," Jessica whispered. "She said she knew this day might come, and she forgives me." I reached across the table and put my hand on my daughter's arm. It was the first time I'd touched her since that afternoon in the garage. "Your mother was a wiser woman than either of us deserve," I said. "Here's what we're going to do. The remaining $11,000 stays on the books. You'll pay it back, every penny, but on a schedule you can actually survive. No more killing yourself with triple shifts. If I lose my daughter trying to get my money back, I haven't gained anything." Jessica broke down completely then. The kind of ugly, heaving sobs that come from a place deeper than grief, from the place where shame and gratitude collide. "As for Marcus," I continued, "the legal process will handle him. That's not your burden anymore. But I need you to understand something, Jessica. If you ever lie to me again, if you ever take anything from this house without asking, if you ever treat your mother's memory with anything less than the respect it deserves, there will be no third chance. This is it." "I understand," she said. "I swear on Mom's name." "That's exactly who I need you to swear on." Marcus's trial came 4 months later. He pleaded guilty to reduced charges as part of a deal, but the judge wasn't sympathetic. 18 months of probation, full restitution ordered, permanent revocation of his insurance license, and a felony record that would follow him for the rest of his life. He moved to Arizona after the sentencing. I never heard from him again, and I didn't want to. 6 months after that afternoon in the garage, I was sitting on my porch watching the sunset paint the Smoky Mountains in shades of orange and gold. Frank was in the chair next to me, nursing a beer Angela had sent over with a plate of lasagna. Jessica's car pulled up the driveway. She got out carrying a toolbox. "Porch railing's loose on the south side," she called out. "Noticed it last week. Thought I'd fix it before it gets worse." She wasn't asking permission. She was just doing what needed to be done. The way Eleanor used to. The way family is supposed to. I watched her work, measuring twice, cutting once, just like I'd taught her when she was 12. Her hands were steady, confident. These weren't the hands of a woman making excuses. These were the hands of a woman building something back. "Hand me that level, would you, Dad?" she said without looking up. I passed it to her and watched her check her work with the same careful attention I'd seen in her mother's hands 1,000 times before. Jessica had paid back every dollar. She'd rebuilt her credit, found a small apartment near the hospital, and started volunteering at a senior center on weekends, helping elderly residents spot financial scams. The irony wasn't lost on either of us, but she said it was the least she could do. "Dad," she said, setting down her hammer and sitting on the porch steps, "I need to tell you something." I waited. "I'm going back to nursing school to finish my degree. Mom always wanted me to, and I think it's time I stopped disappointing her." I felt something shift in my chest. Something that had been clenched tight for months finally loosening its grip. "Your mother would be proud of that decision," I said. "And so am I." Frank raised his beer in a quiet salute. "Eleanor would have liked this," he said. "She'd have liked the ending," I agreed, though she'd have had some sharp words about the beginning. That night, after Frank went home and Jessica left, I sat in Eleanor's chair and held her memory box in my lap. The cedar still smelled faintly of her lavender lotion. I opened it and looked at the letters, the drawings, the tiny hospital bracelet. Everything still there, everything back where it belonged. I picked up the empty lavender envelope, the one that had held Eleanor's letter to Jessica. I turned it over and saw something I'd missed before. On the back, in Eleanor's handwriting, so small I needed my reading glasses. "She'll come back to us, Robert. Be patient. Be firm, but leave the door open. I set the envelope back in the box and closed the lid. Eleanor had always been right about the important things. Looking back on this painful chapter, I've learned something that 40 years of marriage and 67 years of living hadn't quite taught me. Love without boundaries isn't love. It's permission. When we let the people we care about cross lines without consequences, we're not being kind. We're being complicit in their worst impulses. God gave us the wisdom to protect what matters. Our homes, our memories, the legacy of those we've lost. But He also gave us something harder to use, the grace to forgive without forgetting, to set conditions on mercy, to say, I love you, but I will not let you destroy us both. Jessica's fall and her climb back taught me that redemption isn't a moment, it's a process. It's not saying sorry. It's showing sorry day after day, envelope after envelope, nail after nail, until the words and the actions finally match. Marcus taught me the opposite lesson. Some people will always look for the exit when accountability comes knocking. They'll point fingers, shift blame, and disappear the moment the cost of staying exceeds the cost of running. God sees the difference between a person who falls and reaches for a hand up, and a person who falls and drags everyone else down with them. This true story from my life is more common than most families want to admit. Maybe someone you trusted has taken advantage of your kindness. Maybe you're struggling right now with setting boundaries because the person crossing them shares your blood. If this story reached you today, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and leave a comment telling me about your own experience. You'd be surprised how many of us are fighting the same quiet battle behind closed doors. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more stories that speak the truth about family, forgiveness, and the courage it takes to protect what you love.